Hello and welcome to ABPLIVE. I have with me today Mr. Penpa Tsering. He is the president of the Tibetan Government-in-Exile. He's been traveling a lot in the last couple of months talking about Tibet and the issues that are going on there and what is going on and the attitude of the present Chinese government towards the Tibetan movement and the struggle. Welcome to ABPLIVE. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So I'll first talk to you the reason that you are in Delhi. You are talking about something called the Panchen Lama Initiative. Can you tell our viewers what is it about and how important it is to your movement?
So Panchen Lama is regarded as the second highest Lama in the Tibetan Buddhist hierarchy and more so in the Gelugpa tradition, second to His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and historically has been a very prominent personality. This Panchen Lama that we are talking about is the 11th in line. The 10th Panchen Lama died in 1989. There was no post-mortem done on his body, but there were telltale signs of him having been assassinated. He was doing very well. In the last minute, it was, in a kind of way, we believe he was assassinated by the Chinese government. And then his reincarnation, because Tibetan Buddhism came from India, and we follow the Nalanda tradition, but the practice of reincarnation is very, very unique to Tibetan Buddhism. It's not there in other Buddhist countries. And we have a history of more than 900 years in terms of reincarnation. And the 11th Panchen Lama's reincarnation, Chinese government set up a search committee, and the search committee informed His Holiness Dalai Lama about possible candidates, and His Holiness, through the usual rituals and ways of identifying new boy as the reincarnation of the Panchen Lama, His Holiness recognized Kendrick Nayanima as the new young boy, as the new Panchen Lama. But then, as soon as His Holiness announced that, Chinese government was very angry, and they abducted him and all his family. And since that time, in 1995, he was not to be seen at all. There have been many efforts by international community, including the United Nations Human Rights Commission, to verify and ask the Chinese government about whereabouts of the Panchen Lama.
Right.
And when he was younger, the Chinese government used to say he's studying and he doesn't want to be disturbed. And now he must be 32, 33 years old. We still don't know whether he is alive or not. And instead, they appointed their own selected Panchen Lama, who is not respected by the Tibetans. So to show their displeasure, if you go to Lhasa today, if at all you get to go there, then you won't find pictures of the Chinese selected Panchen Lama to be sold on the streets. And you can't sell the His Holiness selected Panchen Lama. So they only sell pictures of the 10th Panchen Lama. And the traditional throne of the Panchen Lamas are in Tashilhombo in Shigatse area, where the Panchen Lamas normally reside. But this Panchen Lama, selected by the Chinese government, lives in Beijing.
So that is the initiative you're going to talk about.
He travels from time to time to Tibet, but then he's not respected by the Tibetans. And whenever, even this year, May, he was in Tibet, and they had to pay money to the Tibetans to go and receive him. So that is the level of acceptance by the Tibetan people. So now the question is whether real Panchen Lama selected by His Holiness Dalai Lama is still alive or not. And that is the opaqueness of Chinese system, that they're able to hide even the presence or not being present. So information from China is not free. So that is why we are pressing for the Chinese government to talk about his whereabouts, whether he's alive or not. If he's alive, we believe that he has not been given the traditional education to carry on his religious responsibilities. And when I was speaking at a gathering in the United States last year, I said if Chinese believe that Panchen Lama is very important for the recognition of the next Dalai Lama, then they made a tactical mistake by not recognizing the Panchen Lama recognized by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. If they had recognized His Holiness Panchen Lama, he would be still in their hands. So, but they always make very hasty decisions. And today we are at a stage in a deadlocked situation where Chinese government is not revealing any information about the real Panchen Lama, that their Panchen Lama is not recognized by the Tibetans. And this is definitely aimed at politicizing the reincarnation issue. And you, I think, very well know that there was an order number 5 issued by the Chinese government in 2007, where the Chinese government, who does not believe in any religion, who does not believe in life after death, wants to be responsible for recognition of reincarnated Lama, which is aimed at the yet to come 15th Dalai Lama. They are not concerned about the living 14th Dalai Lama. They are more concerned about the yet to come 15th Dalai Lama, because since Buddhism came to Tibet from India in 7th, 8th century, Tibetans have been following Buddhism for the last 1,300 years. And it's very, for Tibetans, spirituality is very, very important. But Chinese government sees only development or any kind of conflict. And that's just one perspective. They are not able to look at the holistic aspiration of the people. That is,
So what if you don't get information about this Panchen Lama? Do you have any alternate mechanism? How important it is?
for us to, for the continuation of the institution of the Panchen Lama, it's very important that we have the real Panchen Lama. Now the question is whether the Chinese government will be accountable in terms of human rights to have abducted a small child at the age of 6, and he was the youngest political prisoner in the world. At least there should be some transparency as to whether the Panchen Lama is alive or not, and if he's alive, what he's doing. Those information are very,
And that's what you're going to
necessary for the followers of Panchen Lama, not only in Tibet, but in other countries as well.
So, Mr. Tsering, what is the current situation in Tibet that we are seeing right now? How do you see the attitude of the Xi Jinping government now that, it seems that his administration, he himself as the president, is going to be now for eternity, till he's there. How do you see the attitude towards this entire movement? What is going on? Are you having any kind of dialogue?
Since President Xi Jinping took over in 2012, and from 2013 onwards, most of the policies and programs that he had devised are aimed at eradication of the identity of the nationalities inside Tibet, whether it's to do with the Tibetans or the Uyghur people or the Mongolians. When the whole world is moving towards multiculturalism, China is the only country that's moving towards uniculturalism. There is no political space whatsoever. If people have read George Orwell's 1984, it's more like George Orwell's 1984 is coming into reality in the whole of China, and more so in Tibet, where the system is so gridlocked that people don't have any space to express themselves. So you have already heard about 157 self-immolations in Tibet from 2009 till about last year. And most of the self-immolators are between the age of 17 to 35. They have never ever witnessed independent Tibet. They have never ever witnessed cultural revolution that took place in China between 66 to 76 for 10 long years, where they destroyed everything old. They only see what the Chinese government is doing to Tibet and the Tibetan people today. And they are driven to the stage of desperation to burn themselves to death, hoping against hope that the Chinese government will pay some attention to their plight, or the international community will come to their rescue. And you know that Freedom House has designated Tibet for the last 3 consecutive years as one of the least free countries in this world. And people often ask us why we don't hear about Tibet anymore. That's because there is no political space. Now, today, if I have to think about self-immolating myself, I have to think 100 times, because it's not just me, but people all around me or people related to me are going to suffer because of my action. If you are living outside Lhasa, I'm in Lhasa, either you live with me as a friend or you live in a hotel. If you live in a hotel, they can track you through electronic identification, geolocation. Or if you live with me and then you undertake a political action, then all of my family is going to suffer. So even to join a monastery, you need 4 guarantors to say that this monk will not undertake any political activity. If he or she does take one, then the guarantors are going to suffer. So that is how they have made it gridlock with DNA collection, sample collection of Tibetans, with iris scanning of Tibetans. So everything is aimed at controlling people, more surveillance on people. That makes it very difficult for Tibetans to do anything politically. And then religiously, of course, numbers of monks and nuns have come down drastically. The management of the monasteries have been taken over by security agencies and the United Front Work Department.
Right.
There is a lot of cameras, CCTV cameras, to monitor the movement of monks and nuns. They are not allowed to move freely, to other areas. They need at least 4 or 5 different permits to do that. Now, the atheist Chinese government is setting up Buddhist curriculum in the monastic education. Now they want to be responsible for recognition of reincarnated lamas. That is why His Holiness always quibs wisely, saying that if the Chinese government is really serious about reincarnation, they should study Tibetan Buddhism first. They should believe in life after death. Then, if they are really serious about reincarnation, they should look for Mao Zedong's reincarnation first. The Deng Xiaoping reincarnation second. Now Jiang Zemin is also no more. So they should look for these reincarnations. Then maybe the Dalai Lamas, because without believing in an ideology or a philosophy, how can you be responsible to make it a political tool? Because they know that if they can control the next Dalai Lama, they can control the people of Tibet. But His Holiness has been very categorical in saying that I will be born only in a free world. Chinese government came out with a white paper just recently, and they says that we will look for reincarnation within Tibet. Now it's His Holiness who's going to be reborn after the demise. And who is Chinese government to decide whether His Holiness should be born in Tibet or outside Tibet? There have been cases of the 4th Dalai Lama and the 6th Dalai Lama having born outside Tibet. And even with His Holiness, the 14th Dalai Lama also, he has been very, very clear that he will be born only in a free world. So which means if Tibet is not free by the time that eventuality happens, then he will not be born in Tibet. But Chinese will definitely look for reincarnation within Tibet so that they can exert their control. But then again, my message to the Chinese government is, have you not learned enough lesson from the Panchen Lama saga, where the Chinese select Panchen Lama is not respected by the Tibetans or not accepted by the Tibetans? The same thing will be for the next Dalai Lama if they choose one.
Right.
And then if they choose one, and we will definitely have to choose one through the processes that His Holiness will decide. And when that happens, then they are going to look at a lifelong problem. So I asked them, do you want a lifelong headache or not? By that time, even Xi Jinping won't be alive.
So if I can ask you also, Mr. Tsering, I believe as you talked about self-immolations, there are a lot of Tibetans still coming to India, right? Mostly youth. What are they telling you, and what is it that you're telling them about the struggle? How are you bringing them within the larger movement?
Till about 2008, from the mid-90s onwards, and the early 21st century, we have been receiving any number between 2,000 to 3,000 Tibetans every year, mostly young children who are left here to study, not knowing whether they will ever meet their family again or not. But since 2008, when there was large-scale demonstration inside Tibet, participated by people from all walks of life in all the 3 regions of Tibet, then the control on Tibet was increased manifold, and they made sure that the guides, because to come illegally crossing the Himalayas, it's not possible to come without a guide. So they removed all the guides from Lhasa.
Okay.
So since then, the number of Tibetans coming into exile have been going down, and particularly during the pandemic, maybe also because of pandemic. When I took over the Sikyongship in 2021, I realized that in 2020, there were only about 4 Tibetans from Tibet. In 2020, there were only 5. In 2021, there was only 10. But 2021, only 5. 2022, only 10. And this year, we have little more than 50 from the time they opened up the Nepal-Tibet border from 1st May of this year.
Okay.
So the numbers are still very less. but some are trickling out because they are not able to bear the situation.
You said around more than 50.
This year.
This year.
From January onwards, we had a little more than 50.
So what are they saying about the condition there, and what are you doing, in terms of bringing them under the movement?
No,
Is
one
the
of
CTA playing the
the
role?
bigger problem is the colonial style boarding schools that we are talking about. When we point that out to the Chinese government, they point fingers at United States and say, how did they treated the native people or the First Nation people in Canada, or the Sami people in Scandinavia, or Aboriginals in Australia, Maoris in New Zealand. So these countries have made mistakes. They have realized that, and they're trying to make up for it. But the Chinese government is knowingly doing that for the Tibetans today.
Children are being forcibly taken
They are
up.
forcibly being taken away from their families, from their culture, from their language, from their way of life, put in boarding schools. Even children between 3 to 6, it used to be only a few thousand in boarding schools. Now it has gone up to 150,000. Children between the age of 6 to 18, it's about 1 million children. About 80% of Tibetan children are in boarding schools. Every education is given in Chinese language. From this year, from Eastern Tibet in Kanze Prefecture, they have now done away with Tibetan language courses also. So everything is in Chinese. So which means they are Sinicizing everything, including the minds of young children, to turn them from Tibetan to Chinese. And they have now decided to change the name of the country, Xizang, because they have a lot of questions about the legitimacy of their rule in Tibet. So these are all aimed at Sinification or Sinicization of Tibetans at every level, culturally, linguistically. That is why I keep saying we are dying a slow death. Death is more like cultural genocide that's going on in Tibet, not at the level of concentration camps in the Uyghur. But this Xi Jinping government is responsible for introducing the national security law in Hong Kong, the concentration camps in the Uyghur, which were first experimented in Tibet, because it was the same party secretary in Tibet who moved to Uyghur and practiced it largely, and then colonial-style boarding schools. These are going to be very, very detrimental for the Tibetans if this continues for another few decades.
You were recently in US, I believe, talking about the key Tibetan bill. Can you shed some light on that? What are the Americans telling you?
No, we believe that geostrategically Tibet has played a very important role, because Tibet is huge. It's 2.5 million square kilometers, about 60-70% of India's landmass and 25% of China's landmass. And politically, we have been the political buffer between the two most populous nations in the world. There was never ever a China-India border till communists invaded Tibet. But we do follow middle way policy, which is to seek a solution, avoiding extreme polarities of the situation of Tibet traditionally as an independent country, and the situation of Tibet right now under the suppressive Chinese government. So we have to find a middle way, seeking autonomy, whereby the Tibetans will have the freedom to use its language, practice its religion, preserve its way of life and its environment. But this 16th cabinet, after I assumed office, we decided, even though we follow the middle way policy, we decided to change our strategy a little bit to focus on the historical status of Tibet as an independent state. Because Chinese keep saying, because their propaganda is so vast and so pervasive all around the world, they keep asking every government to say Tibet is part of PRC. Because if Tibet has already been part of PRC, why are they asking other governments to say that? Because they know that they have no legitimacy of their rule in Tibet, and they are trying to seek the legitimacy from the international community. So they rule Tibet with an iron hand. Then countries also keep repeating this statement, like what the Chinese government want this, and they're parroting the same statement. And then where is the reason for China to come and talk to us? So that is why we believe that there has to be a recognition on the historical status of Tibet as an independent state.
By the US also?
By every government, hopefully. But then US is the only government that has a law on Tibet, the US Tibet Policy of 2002, which has been amended to US Tibet Support and Policy Act of 2020.
Right.
Now, this is another amendment to the existing act, whereby US findings, congressional findings says that China's claim over Tibet as Tibet being part of China since antiquity is false and is inaccurate. His Holiness has also not admitted to that. And there is a lot of disinformation from the Chinese side on Tibet's history. And this is something that needs to be challenged. So essentially recognizing Tibet's historical status as an independent state, and also to declare Tibet as an unresolved, Sino-Tibet conflict as an unresolved conflict. So this is something that we have been working on, and now it is coming to fruition.
Okay.
We've reached this stage where the House Foreign Affairs Committee has passed it unanimously. Now this will go to the House and to the Senate, and then for the presidential accent. And once that is done, we'll need to push this in other countries as well.
But it should be done before the presidential elections there, right?
Yeah, we have a small window, so this should be done before April, May of next year. Otherwise, everybody will go into election mode in the House.
Right. Well, ever since taking charge also as the Sikyong, Mr. Tsering, you've made an initiative to meet the Tibetan diaspora and making them as aware about, Tibetans living in India as to how they should be involved in every aspect of the movement. What are they telling you? What is the response you get from them?
I think very encouraging, because they also feel that the Sikyong coming personally to talk to the younger generation. First thing, we have created this platform called the Voluntary Tibet Advocacy Group. Of course, we have this challenge of dispersing community from the compact communities in India and Nepal, younger generations moving out, and we also have cyclical issues with that, with schooling and all that. But the advantage is also that now you find Tibetans in more than 25 different countries. They have become nationals there. They have the right to vote. They speak the language. They understand the system. So the Tibetans could be the best advocates for Tibet.
Right.
And that is where the younger generation need to take the lead. So we formed this platform called VTAC, Voluntary Tibet Advocacy Group. Now annually we have held the first International Youth Forum, where we bring in 100 youths to Dharamsala, train them to become leaders. And if we continue this for another 100 years, 10 years, we will have 1,000 Tibetan leaders. Now, when I go out to other countries, I make it a point to meet with the younger generation separately. First, they have to feel proud to be a Tibetan, understand the geostrategic importance of Tibet, not only for Tibetans and Tibet, but for the whole region. The environmental importance of Tibet, the importance of Tibetan Buddhist culture, that is, we are very proud to be a repository of one part of ancient Indian wisdom, which has the potential to spread more peace and non-violence in this world now ridden by violence. They need to be more focused on non-violence, not just violence. Then if media and political leaders only go to those places where there's violence, then people feel that unless you undertake violence, there is no response from the international community. That is why we have to keep talking about our non-violent struggle based on India's wisdom, and preservation of the Tibetan culture is preserving India's culture, because it's an extent, we consider ourselves as an extension of Indian culture, both the language and the religion. That shapes our way of thinking and way of life. And China trying to change the emotions of the Tibetans from Tibetan to Chinese also is going to affect the emotional equation of the Tibetans, who have a lot of respect for India as the Aryavrat, the land of our Guru. The future generations may not have the same thinking towards India. So that also impacts India's security from a different perspective.
Right.
So there are many angles to all this, and unfortunately, many countries don't understand China and its motivations, because nothing comes for free from China. It's just investment is not enough. There has to be a more holistic understanding of what China is doing. We live in India, you are here. We know what is happening to Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Cambodia, Bangladesh. All these countries who maintain good relations with China are suffering now economically because of the Belt and Road initiatives, creating debt economies, all that. And there is very little knowledge about that in Latin America. You mentioned about Brazil, Colombia, Mexico. I went there, spoke to universities in the international departments. Professors don't have good understanding of China. So we tell them, we are not coming here only to seek support for our cause, but for you also, it's very important that you understand China for your own country and for your own people. A few years down the line, you might say, oh, we didn't understand. That's too late. So there has to be a deeper understanding of China's global ambitions. Now you are talking about Xi Jinping's security, global security initiative, global economic initiative, global cultural initiative, and they want to spread authoritarianism in this world. Now, do the Western world need to be? Do they want a dictator to rule them? So one has to understand the oneness of humanity, and everybody looking for happiness, not problem, and also the interdependent nature of our existence. Now, every small thing in one part of the world affects another. For Europeans, they are just waking up to the reality. But even now they are going back to engagement with the Chinese. So sometimes they tell me, "Oh, the dragon is biting at us." Then I tell them, "Who fed the dragon to make it so strong to be able to bite at you?" Now, knowing that the dragon is biting at you, if you still keep feeding the dragon, then whose fault is it? Because economy is one thing that can really bring China on its knees. Because of its economy, they have military power, they have political power, but the only power they lack is moral power. Yeah, so if you keep strengthening China economically, they will keep investing in military, they will keep investing in artificial intelligence, they will keep investing in space technology, which the West consider is a threat, and the whole the region also consider it. And China, knowingly or unknowingly, is increasing defense expenditure of all the neighboring countries, from Japan to Taiwan to Australia to Southeast Asia to India. So where do you buy the arms from? Again, you buy from Western countries, from Europe, from United States. So China is fueling all this military race. So it's a mixed message that Chinese government is saying. They want European market, they want markets in Southeast Asia, but then again, Europe's main concern is right now Ukraine, and they are aligning with Russia. Last year or beginning of this year, Wang Yi went to Europe. He met with President Macron. He met with President Scholz at the Munich conference, security conference, and then he goes and meets with President Orban in Hungary, receives a red carpet welcome, and then he meets with Putin. So, what message is China trying to send? And are the Europeans understanding what the Chinese are doing? Now, even with the upcoming Europe China summit, because China's main agenda is economics. But if countries don't speak up for their values, China will keep putting pressure, and they will be using what the colonials used to use against the colonies those days: divide and rule, carrot and stick. The same thing that's being used by the Chinese government against the Europeans, because they don't have a common trade policy or common foreign policy. So we keep telling the Europeans, of course, they realize that they cannot make China more powerful than what it already is. But then they realize that Russia is the immediate threat and China is the long-term challenge. But then how it's going to translate in the form of policies and programs are two different things. That is why we request them to have more transatlantic cooperation rather than competition when it comes to China. You might like to have your own independent foreign policy. That's fine. But when it comes to China, there has to be concerted effort, not just transatlantic, but with other democracies around the world, with AP4, India, and other countries who have similar values. And if you don't stand up for your values, then it's not going to be effective on China. But then another thing we also tell them is that please don't look at us only from the perspective of a victim of Chinese communism. Just to be pitied with and give some money or give some, say some nice things and keep the Tibetans happy. Because nobody wants anarchy in China. But at the same time, if you want to bring about positive changes inside China, you need both internal forces and external forces. And we are the internal forces, the Tibetans, the Uyghurs, the Mongols, even the Hong Kongers today. And you can include the Taiwanese also. So if you need both internal forces and external forces to then look at us as partners, because we understand China better than the European countries.
So when it comes to the Tibetan diaspora and also the youth, as you said, they are now coming together. They're the new generation, they're the younger generation, right? They may not feel the struggle or may feel it so strongly. Do they also align with His Holiness thought process that the middle way approach is the best approach, and being an autonomous region is the choice and not full independence, because there is a section of Tibetan youth who believe that we need to be fully independent and we cannot trust the Chinese at all.
That's why now we are refocusing on history, because one, I say 4 reasons. One is to send a message to China that you cannot change history. You can't, whatever narrative you follow, history is history, it's in the past. That's why His Holiness also says, through the middle way, we are talking about happiness for the Tibetan people in future. I'm not a historian. Let's leave history to historians. Now, historians, including a Chinese, is also saying that Tibet has never been considered part of China by the Imperial Chinese historical records. And even as per international law, it is not part of China. Now, other message is to the international community that how can you just say that Tibet is part of PRC? Have you looked at Tibet's history in the first place? That's why we keep telling them we have only one agreement with Communist China, and that is 17-point agreement that was forced upon us after invasion of Chamdo, which in international law is null and void. And it's the same international law after Second World War and after the formation of United Nations, whether it's happened to Tibet 72 years ago or whether it's happening to Ukraine today. It's the same international law. Then the third message is for the Tibetan community that we need to focus on studying our history, because if we don't study now, how can we pass on history to the younger generations of Tibetans to come? And then also this fact about the independence and autonomy, Umelam, the middle way. We don't need to be infighting against each other within the Tibetan community. Refocus that against the Chinese. Whether you're seeking independence also, you focus it on Chinese. Whether you're seeking autonomy also, you focus it on China. And today I say more than the independent advocates, we are talking more about the historical status of Tibet as an independence. So even independent advocates need to work on this to establish the fact that Tibet was an independent country. Then what steps you follow is another matter, but what His Holiness proposed, what majority of the Tibetans support, and that was approved unanimously by the parliament, is the middle way. And that is taking a holistic understanding of the situation and considering the reality of the situation today, based on what is happening internationally, what is happening inside China, and what's happening in Tibet. This is the only viable, practical and pragmatic solution, the middle way. Even I used to be young at one time, and we used to advocate for independence. But that does not necessarily make to say that that is the best means to go about. But then in democracy, you will have different opinions,
Right.
and it's natural.
But you let history guide you in this.
Yeah, there has to be recognition of the historical status. Otherwise, it makes there's no leverage for middle way.
Mr. Tsering, I know you have a very busy schedule. So my last question that always comes up is the relation between India and China and how Tibet falls in between, as you also said, some time back. So now the fact that it's been more than 3 years that the ongoing, military standoff that is going on at the border areas, how do you see that? And that basically is like a, what you've told me earlier, that Tibet wants to be the bridge in between. How do you see the situation evolving finally?
It's because of China's belligerence, salami slicing of Indian territory, incursions, that India has also taken a more stronger stand that unless there is disengagement from all sectors, there will be no normalization of relations. So what does China gain from all this? So I try to analyze the situation as much as possible. And the only thing I can feel is that China is getting paranoid about security issues. And they are, their belligerence and bellicosity towards India, towards Taiwan, in South China Sea. Why do they keep all these hotspots burning? Because if there is a threat, or when there is a threat to the survival of the Communist Party, they will attack one of these places. But otherwise, the fights that are taking place in Ladakh, nothing grows in those mountains. So what do you gain by that? And you're pushing China more toward the West. So US-China relations is improving. You have a lot of new multilateral forums like Quad and other formations that are taking place around. It's only
India being
because
pushed
of,
towards the West.
because of China's actions. Otherwise, India has always been overcautious. They have been always been trying to, and India is not an offensive party. They have always been defensive, and they have always been cautious when it comes to relation with China, because with now Tibet being controlled or occupied by China, you have 3,600 kilometers of the world's most non-porous border in this world, because there is a huge trust deficit. So how do you build this trust? And that can be built only through human-to-human relations and culture-to-culture relation, which is not happening. And what China is doing on the border is not helping anybody. And we are glad that India has taken a more stronger position on that. And the one thing we know of China is that if you stand up for your position and values, then only China will respect you. If you keep towing not just your knees but also your hands, then they will treat you like a donkey. They'll keep riding you.
But India is also supporting the Tibetan cause as it used to, you feel?
I think the more India's interests and Tibetan interests aligns, because one reality I keep telling my people is that if there has to be a negotiated solution, then there's no other way than by talking to the Chinese government. But till such a time, we will have to reach out to the international community. But we also realize the fact, we have to understand the fact that no country will leave aside their national interests and take up Tibet's national interests. So when the interests of India, or for that matter, any other country, aligns with the Tibetan interests, then there is more space to move forward together. But till such a time, then every interest varies.
So how do you think that alignment will happen?
Yeah, now we hear more voices in the Indian journalism also. Journalists are talking, military people who are educated are talking more about Tibet's interests, aligning with India's interests, and saying that there should be more recognition for His Holiness or the Central Tibetan Administration that is based here. But we are very thankful to the Indian government that we exist because of Indian government. Even though the support is more for humanitarian, we also understand that because of the proximity of the border, India has to be more cautious than other Western countries. They are more vocal about Tibet. We have an open relationship with the Indian government.
Sure. Thank you so much, Mr. Tsering.
So much.
That was Mr. Penpa Tsering, President of the Tibetan Government-in-Exile, telling us about the current situation in Tibet and what is China's views on the situation currently and how the international community is talking about it and also supporting. For ABP Live, this is Nayanima Basu. On camera, Ayan Hussain.